It is the Fenway Rundown. It's Monday, October 6th. Chris Cotillo, Sean McAdam here. We are back home from New York. We are on Zoom for the first time in a few pods because we were going rogue in the press box at Yankee Stadium with a portable mic. But we're back. We did say after Game 3 when we recorded the mini pod, we'd be back with a next day kind of post-mortem on the Red Sox. Travel got in the way, of course, as always. And, I've heard that Newark's not a great place to fly out of. And boy, I found out. So we are back Monday. And, some time has passed, obviously, since the Red Sox were knocked out. They had their post-mortem press conference today at Fenway, about 40 minutes of non-answers and qualifiers. But it's our job to sift through all of that for you, the good people at home. So we will do a little bit of micro and a lot of macro today. Might go a little longer than the usual 30. I know you hate to hear that, Sean. Um, but let's just go back. Let's start in New York. Let's start next week and then or start last week, and then we'll move forward and look forward a little bit. So the Red Sox lose that game 4-0. We talked on the mini pod the other night about some of the issues that plagued them all year, rearing their ugly head. Bayo hook in game 2 set them back. It looked panicky, all this stuff we talked about. With a few days being removed from that now, how do you look back at the Red Sox postseason series and the quick exit and everything we saw down there?
Well, one of the questions I asked Craig Breslow today was, is it dangerous to take too much out of 27 innings? And in determining what you need to do to improve your club and be better for next season. And I think there's a danger there.
Yeah.
And yet, some of the things that beat them in those 3 games were, as you suggested, shortcomings that we knew about coming in. The sloppy defense, the inability to convert balls into outs. We saw it with Duran dropping a line drive, essentially hit right to him. We saw a lack of communication between Abreu and Rafaela in game 3 and a ball that falls in. We saw a two-base error on what could have been an inning-ending double play on the part of Nathaniel Lowe.
Hmm.
That stuff's not new, nor is the lack of power that they had. We talked about this in the post game after game 3. One home run, it was a solo shot by Trevor Story in game 2 over 3 games. So, as much as I caution against reading too much into 3 games, hey, look, we can go back over 162 and pick 3 games together that would not be emblematic of the season, right? But I happen to think those 3 were. I think it's probably because you're playing another quality team on the big stage. Everything gets magnified, but it showed that some of the stuff that hampered them during the year ultimately led to their demise in October.
Yeah, and I've said this all year, and I've said this now for 2 or 3 years, and Cora finally kind of copped to this at some point during this season. The offense is, I don't know if overrated is the right word, but the statistics don't tell the story on if you watch it night in and night out, which I know a lot of people listening do. We obviously do. It is a kind of a boomer bust offense, but not in like a power way. It's kind of like they put together some big innings. They'll have an 18-run game that'll inflate the numbers. But if you watch it, they go cold for weeks. And as soon as somebody like Schlittler starts dominating, the at bats go quickly, and especially with a lineup like the one they were trotting out in New York, where they're not at full strength. I didn't even think that lineup's talk about not being one guy away. They're 2 or 3 really, with the limited guys you had down the stretch and guys battling through and struggling, whatever. So I just think the offense, kind of people look at it and be like, oh, it's the Red Sox. It's always there. I don't think it is. And I think in that game, you can talk about the one inning that went off the rails, but strikeouts are such a big part of it for this team. The lack of a game changing thump. I mean, Story had 25 homers. Willier had 22. Bregman had what, 17, 18?
Yep.
Devers, what was Devers? Where did Devers finish on the Red Sox in terms of home run? Like fifth?
Probably fourth or fifth, probably
Yeah.
right behind Bregman, I would think. I think he had 15 or 16 when he went.
And I mean, Rafael is probably right around there. We could
Yep.
easily pull this up, and I will. But I mean, that kind of speaks to, yeah. Well, no, Devers is. I think they might have cut him out of here because I can't find him. But whatever, there's 6 guys with more than 10, right? I mean, Story 25. Abreu
Yeah, two
22.
guys more than 20. That to me
Yeah, right.
is a perfect indictment of the lack of power. You
And
don't
you
have
have
to have a guy like Aaron Judge with 52 or Cal Raleigh hitting 60, but you better have three or four guys at 25 or better. And they had one. They had Trevor Story who got to 25, and that was it.
Devers would have been tied for sixth. Story, Abreu, Bregman, Duran, Rafaela, and then Devers as a Red Sox and Narvaez each had 15. Devers, of course, finishes the year with 35, which is his most since 2021. He obviously had 163 games to do it. And then there was streaky, and we can, dissect Rafael Devers for the next decade. Point stands, and we'll get to that. Post game clubhouse. Obviously, we touched on this a little bit. Um, I like the quotes from Bregman and Story. Like, no, this sucks. It's not a step forward. I think that's the mentality. Or no, I mean, they look at it as a step forward, but like, it's not a success, I should say. No, it sucks. I want them to remember this feeling. This is awful. We came here to win it all, and maybe they thought they had a chance to win it all. I don't think we really did, even at their peaks throughout the year. Um, but I think that's the right mentality other than being satisfied. And that just speaks to kind of the broader question we've talked about for years, like have the goalpost move. That's the column I wrote a year ago on breakdown end of season day. If you're looking at this season as a success, I get why you would. But for the Boston Red Sox, they've established their standard at being World Series or bust. So now it kind of has to be. So on the was it a success question, I will go, yes and no. I think that's a fair way to do it and a cop out.
Yeah, I would say it was a step forward, certainly, and a qualified success. That's what I wrote
Hmm.
on Friday. There's more to be done. Certainly, you shouldn't be content with getting knocked out in the first round and not even getting to the division series level. But when you haven't been at all since 21, simply getting in, hey, having a season in which you have more wins than losses they hadn't done since
Right.
21. They improved by 8 games. It was a significant step forward, but there's a lot more to go.
Yeah. My other takeaways, and this is for a column that I've been writing in my head for 3 days. Maybe tonight's the night. Like attrition, obviously, caught up to them. They had a ton of guys out. Every team kind of has that at a certain level. But when you look at, to me, like just kind of the role players and the Yankees kind of stocked up on quantity and quality was their goal, but really it turned out being quantity at the trade deadline. You look at how many major leaguers were on their roster who had a little role here or there in that series. Ryan McMahon, right? The guy who was on the Rockies forever. Uh, Ahmed
Caballero,
Rosario, Caballero. Rosario had big hits. Caballero, the guy Cora talked about as a threat. Obviously, the bullpen of
Bednar.
Bednar, locking it down. I mean, this wasn't, superstar acquisitions at the deadline like we've seen some other teams get rentals and take off. I always think of CC Sabathia as the gold standard in that regard. But, like the Yankees added what, 7 or 8 guys probably. I know Duvall didn't work out, and I know the reliever Bird they got from the Rockies didn't work out. But like they took a lot of shots, and the Red Sox got 2 innings out of Steven Matz in the playoffs for the trade deadline. He was fine as a middle relief addition. They got nothing out of Dustin May. He lost them games instead of winning them. I thought that was kind of stark. You look at Seattle, Suarez and Naylor in the middle of that lineup. Like these are. I just thought it was stark in the Yankee series.
Toronto is starting Shane Bieber.
Right, right. And like those are the types of things that, uh, kind of almost rewires how you look at the deadline. No one could have expected the Red Sox to like go out and add an outfielder in anticipation that Abreu and Roman were going to be hurt down the stretch. But another bat would have helped. I think looking at Nathaniel Lowe, I guess became that guy a couple weeks later. But if you want to count it, but it just I think the trade. Craig Breslow often said the trade deadline will be judged by how the next couple months go, and I think we can look at it now as a big failure. I think that is kind of something that is a storyline not being talked about too much because people are talking about the in-game decisions, but it's a failure you could see coming from 1,000 miles away. And they've leaked out a little bit of how things went down. We were focused on Joe Ryan, but it's just when you look at it, to get Dustin May was terrible, and Steven Matz, who did his job, but his job was, minimal. Like that is a
He was
reason.
he was
It's
an
a reason
around
they're
the
out right
edges
now.
guy. He wasn't
Yeah.
going to impact games one way or the other. He could, be a bridge guy to take you from a starter to your high leverage guys, and he was fine in that role, but not exactly critical.
Yeah, and so like this is just and Roman Anthony getting hurt I think is probably near the top of the list and the other issues we've talked about with the team. But I think there's, 15-20% blame on this early exit based on them having a pretty bad deadline. So we can kind of, discuss that 2 months later finally.
Yeah, certainly they were not aggressive enough. Had they pushed and gotten Eugenio Suarez and Joe Ryan, how different are they today? Or are they still playing?
Well, I
You know,
mean,
is
just like, Merrill Kelly or one of those guys we talked about to pitch game three. Think about if they get into a best of five or they get into a best of seven. Like early was fine. We've talked about how he wasn't the issue the other night. All good, right? In no world should you be putting that kid in as your game three starter. I understand Giolito got hurt a week ago and they had no other choice. But I mean, they
although
kind
to
of
be
did have another
fair,
choice, right?
to be fair, Toronto is doing that with Savage.
Right.
He's got
But
almost exactly the
they also
same
have better
number.
guys around him.
Yeah, but it comes down to in game two, when you didn't play in the first round and had a first round bye,
Yeah.
your game two starter, just like Connolly Early, had 4 major league starts to his credit.
Right.
So I think the whole idea of relying on incredibly young and inexperienced starting pitching in October is here to stay because teams now invariably run out of healthy arms in September and don't have much choice. That's
Yeah.
why Early was up. That's
I
why
mean, I think with Toronto though, like they still also have like Scherzer and Barrios is on the roster. I know he hasn't pitched well. Like they have more insulation than the Red Sox do.
well, Scherzer didn't make the roster in the first series, and neither did Chris Bassett. So I
Right.
mean,
Well, yeah. I guess
that
Barrios is hurt
they
too,
were
right?
desperate because of health too. So
And
it's
Schlittler
the
pitched
war
game
of
three for the
attrition.
Yankees.
Pardon me.
And Schlittler pitched game three for the Yankees too,
Right.
right? So, I mean, I get it. I'm just saying that it's if you go get Merrill Kelly, then you have four guys. If you go
Yep.
get, and I guess that's what they were hoping Dustin May would be, but Dustin May is a guy who's never been healthy and he was not effective this year. So I think there's a lot of second guessing to go around. And like, to me, it's not always that impact move. Like the point I'm making is like the Yankees added like 7 bit pieces, and they're all little upgrades over who they had on the roster. And when Volpe they needed to unplug him, they go with Caballero, and Rosario hits lefties really well. He's way younger than you'd think he is, by the way. He's like 31 or 32. You'd guess he's like 38. And Bednar and the guys they had come in, and McMahon as a platoon guy. Like, there were opportunities for that to happen. I think it's a worthwhile second guess.
They absolutely could have done more. I think they had a lot of balls in the air at the 11th hour, and too many of them ended up falling to the ground, and they had very minor incremental improvements that weren't even as good as they thought they were going to be, however modest their goals were.
Yeah. So I mean, we'll have plenty of time to look back. I think our plan is to do grades and awards and all those types of things later this week into next. And, there were really good individual performances. Um, do you wanna do the award kind of debate right now, or do you want to save it? Because it doesn't really fit in on grades either. We can go kind of quick.
Red Sox awards?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I state my case once and for all, and I believe it, and that Roman Anthony should be considered for the team MVP just because Ian Brown. We were getting to these press box arguments, and the great Ian Brown would say, you don't judge the award based on the difference they make when they're not on the field compared to when they are. And to me, it's like, no, that's actually exactly how you should. That actually is the definition of value there. And we saw that over the last couple months. I think he's a worthwhile contender among position players. I bet you're, kind of more willing to go with Story. If you want to go start to finish MVP, Garrett Crochet for sure. But to me, just the last few weeks illustrated what Anthony meant,
Yeah,
and
well,
I think that I would think about if I had to make that choice of who the Red Sox MVP was, I would consider Roman Anthony, and he did not play enough games to qualify, but that's not my point.
right. Well, for his 2 months, he was incredibly impactful. And we saw in September and the 3 games that they played last week in New York just how much they missed him. He was a real catalyst at the top of the lineup when he took over as the leadoff guy. He had a 400 on base percentage. He was not intimidated by big situations. We saw him come through time and again in late and close situations. He played a very good right field. Nothing to dislike about Roman Anthony. I just think we are somewhat, I underscore that word, overvaluing what 2 months can mean over the course of a 6 month season.
Mm-hmm.
And we are assuming that he would have continued at that elite pace for the month that he missed. Would he have? Probably, but we don't know that because there are ups and downs to young players making the jump to the big leagues for the first time. As good as Anthony was and as comfortable and as settled in as he looked after a couple of weeks, again, I think we're projecting a little about what the production would have been had he not gotten hurt. Don't get me wrong. He is going to be their most important player probably for the next 5 to 7 years. I just don't know that you can award him the MVP. I go with Garrett Crochet because getting a number one really proved to be a huge difference. As Alex Cora said, interminably down the stretch, he stops losing streaks and begins winning and extends winning streaks. And he did that on a regular basis. He led the league in innings. He led the majors in strikeouts. Everything they could have hoped for and more. And I would put Trevor Story number 2 with Roman Anthony third in the MVP balloting.
Yeah, and this is the other question I wanted to ask: who had the better season, Trevor Story or Alex Bregman?
Trevor Story.
I agree with you there. I think it was a
Yeah,
little.
I
I think
mean,
Story's year was a little overrated, but whatever.
Bregman had a fine first couple of months. He was headed to having an excellent season, but every month after he came back, he got a little worse. And I wonder how that impacts negotiations, which are going to be fascinating. Do the Red Sox want to bring Alex Bregman back? Of course they do. They can't say enough good things about him. Particularly when it comes to his off-field contributions, his leadership, his mentorship, what he meant to young players, what he meant to the pitching staff. I don't undervalue or undersell that at all. But if you're getting ready to commit another probably 4, if not 5 years at in excess of $30 million a year, you better be getting more than a 720 OPS, which is what he gave them in the second half. And then you factor in that this is now twice where he's missed almost a third of the season with a calf injury that could now become a chronic thing. Those things would all concern me. We have plenty of time to get into the likelihood of Bregman returning. But yeah, he did not produce, with a big asterisk because he was far from 100%.
Right.
And came back and committed himself to playing and helping in some way. But he had a disappointing second half.
Yeah, for sure. And, Story was better for a longer played, to have Story play 160 games, including the playoffs, is a huge, huge storyline for this team, no pun intended. And we will get into the opt-out decisions as the month goes on. This one's pretty obvious. I'll ask you, biggest surprise. I mean, do we have to say more than 2 words that are Aroldis and Chapman?
Probably not. I mean, I think you and I both had concerns about how well that experiment would go.
Neither of us thought he was going to be the closer until opening day.
Exactly. We assumed it was going to be Liam Hendricks or
Slayton.
maybe even Slayton or somebody else. Chapman, somewhat by default, won it in spring training, but boy, did he earn it from there on. I have tremendous respect for a guy at 36, 37, changing a career-long weakness, which is strike throwing and walks.
Yep.
and he did it. That's not easy to do. It's not an easy thing to fix at 25 or 26, never mind 36 or 37 with a dozen years in the big leagues behind you. He did everything that they could have hoped for. He blew two saves all year. He was available. He was fine with pitching in the seventh or eighth if that's what they needed to get a pocket of lefties or the real high leverage spot that was coming up late in games. A plus across the board.
We'll save the grades, but yes, of course. Ben, the last one I will touch on. We can get into more of this obviously when we do the individual player performances, but biggest disappointment.
Well, I guess you could start with Tristan Casas, who did not have a good first 5 weeks, and then the injury, not his fault, obviously, but it wasn't trending well when he got hurt. He's someone that you would have to think about. And I think you have to also plug in Jaron Duran there. Even if you didn't think he was capable of another, 900 OPS season and the kind of year he had in 24, his drop off was pretty substantial, and he became a real weakness when it came to left-handed pitching, and he did not play good defense in left field.
I would say the quietest 41 double season in the history of baseball, right?
Yeah,
I mean, and he had 41 doubles, 13 homers, and 16 homers. 13 triples, 16 homers. That's, you know, still a 77-74 OPS, still respectable. But when you dig into, the splits, like you talked about, a 600 OPS against lefties, that's a big drop off. Weird, a guy that really took advantage of Fenway, 880 OPS at home, 666 on the road, which is kind of weird. If you look at, month by month, a fantastic July, middling May, June, August, and September, October with a 692. So he's definitely, I would say a step back. We can grade him later in the week. To me, biggest disappointment, Tanner Houck. You could have seen this coming from a mile away in spring training because something was off. We take all these victory laps as the Red Sox over. Look at the workload we got our homegrown pitchers up to last year, and you get nothing out of Houck and Crawford, which Cora talked about today as being important. Obviously, Bayo took the step forward this year, so that's on the other end of that. But to me, yeah, I think Houck is right up there just because it was, literally as bad as you could be, on the mound, and then the injury diagnosis, and then the timeline being so screwed up that he'll probably miss all of last year. Like it couldn't get worse. So, I like Tanner Houck as a person, so I'm not. It's not a victory lap or anything. I'm just saying it's a horrible, horrible, like couldn't possibly get much worse season for
yeah.
him.
Well, he and Casas are very similar in
Yeah.
that you
Well,
don't
no,
blame
because
them for the
Casas might be
injuries.
back for next year, so it's not as bad.
Well, no guarantee that Casas is ready at the start of the year.
Right.
I mean, not with that's not a torn ACL. That's a far more invasive surgery and a longer recovery time and a more serious injury. But I
Yeah.
thought similar in the fact that the injuries were not their fault, but even when they were, pre-diagnosed, they were not performing well.
Yeah. And again, you look at the list of things that went wrong on the way to 89 wins. You have Devers for 2.5 months, and you trade him. You get nothing back in that package. Houck gives you nothing. Crawford literally doesn't, lead you in innings and doesn't pitch. Casas gets hurt. Hendricks doesn't do anything. Sandoval never comes back. Roman gets hurt. Marcelo gets hurt. Like, credit to them for getting in. And I think, you can look at it that way too. Let's focus on today. We were both at Fenway for most of the morning for the end of year press conference. Can I reveal your takeaway as we were sitting in the press box after?
Yeah, sure.
Where you said, these are always one of the most gigantic wastes of time of our calendar year.
They are. And, part of that is Craig Breslow's refusal to engage in any specifics. And I understand you're not going to come out with your game plan for the winter on cue cards and let everybody know what it is you're trying to do. But I think you can be a little more forthcoming than he is. And, his game plan today was, question asked about X. And he says, yes, we would like X to improve for next year, whether
we're
it
not
be
ruling anything out.
the rotation, more power, What about the coaching staff? We're discussing it. What about this? Well, we'll have to see. It was not very revealing, which is really shouldn't be a surprise at this point. But it was frustrating in that you really couldn't get a sense of priorities. Although I guess if you read between the lines, you can deduce reasonably, as most anybody would looking at this team, that they need another proven starting pitcher toward the front of the rotation, and they need more power, and they need to fix the defense. Those are three significant to do things.
Right. And I think the most telling thing that Breslow talked about today was a quote in response to a question asked by the intrepid Chris Cotillo, where it was, talking about like, where do you see yourself compared to the playoff teams? And he said, it's going to be a consideration that teams who are still playing hit the ball out of the ballpark more than we do. It's a zero-sum game. You score runs wherever you score them in the regular season, but with elite pitching, it's easier to get a hold of one versus put together an inning. And in the postseason, that plays. And I think he looked at his team, the one homer in the 3 games, but the stuff we were just talking about, the home run totals, and wants to add pop. To me, that goes beyond the Bregman and Story decisions. I was talking about this a couple nights ago. Like, the more we get closer, and he's not a perfect fit for the roster right now, and you'd have to figure it out, and it would be limiting in some ways. I think a Schwarber reunion is something that's really going to be on the table here. Honestly, I was thinking Pete Alonso for a while. At that point, at that level of production where you're getting 50 homers, does it matter if it's left-handed or right-handed? He crushes the hell out of lefties every year. Schwarber does. And so, like, I think it's in play. Cora loves him. Like, yeah.
And I wonder if he becomes, and maybe the timing won't work here, but I wonder if he becomes more attractive to them if they don't re-sign Bregman, because Schwarber brings, it's a different kind of leadership. It's a little more vocal and a little bit more outgoing, and maybe not as studied and earnest as it is with Bregman, but it's an important leadership void that he would fill. Not to play Can You Top This, but I started writing a couple of months ago that they should think about making a big run at Schwarber again. He liked it here. I know he likes Philly. I know Philly doesn't want to lose him. I think if you ask the consensus around the game, the feeling is he's not going anywhere. But maybe the Red Sox could overwhelm him a little bit and overpay and bring him back to be, the leadoff guy, the number 3. I mean, that's the other thing. He can do just about anything.
Right.
He can hit leadoff if you don't want to have Roman hitting leadoff or Duran hitting leadoff. He could hit third or fourth because he hits for enough power and gets on base enough. Obviously, he's not a great base runner, but he's kept, he's lost some weight. He's kept himself in good shape.
Right. I was going to say, you don't have to worry about his skill set aging because he's had a 40-year-old skill set his whole career, right? So, like, what are you going to lose? And to me, like, what's the difference between, other than righty lefty, the difference between him and Alonso in terms of fit? Alonso is like a horrible first baseman, right? So we haven't studied the
bottom
the
5 percentile defensively.
Schwarber could do that if you needed him to go play over there. You've seen it here,
right? And even tip his hat when he makes the right play.
That's right. That's why I want him back. But I feel like one of those guys, or Suarez is a free agent, right? Like maybe he is a guy that you have in there. I don't know. I think first base is interesting for a variety of reasons. One of them being Costas, another one being like they seem to want Romy Gonzalez on the field, and we want him starting against lefties somewhere. So where is that? Is that at first?
I think that's a mistake. I think he is best utilized off the bench, maybe starting twice a week, pinch hitting, filling in, giving guys a break. I do not think he's an everyday player.
Yeah, and the defense, obviously, a big reason there.
Right.
Other takeaways from today, I think the power thing was the biggest one. I think it's all well and good to talk about finding that number 2 starter or 1A and 1B. I think at the end of the day, it comes down to acquisition cost. To me, if you start a Joe Ryan package with one of your major league outfielders and one of the pitchers that broke through, whether that be a Dobbins or an Early or a Tolley, I know those are varying degrees of value. I think you probably can get something done for anybody, especially if you include Duran or Abreu or Rafaela. They're not trading Anthony. They're most likely not trading Meyer or Campbell. for different reasons. I think the value low on Campbell. So I think if you can find a team that likes the password skill set, that's a chip. You know, like
Yep.
maybe you sell high on early because the value's probably high right now after what he did down the
Yep.
stretch. Like I just there's a lot of
We
combinations.
they go into the offseason as well positioned to make a big trade if they want to as any team in the game.
Yeah.
And this is after
And they're
they
going to do
traded
something that
four.
pisses off fans who by like in not necessarily a bad way, but like they're going to trade a player you know. Last year it
Right.
was four guys who had not been in the majors yet, and people were like, Kyle Teal, we've heard of him, but they're going to trade somebody who you're excited you, whether it be an early or a Tolley or Duran or something, right? It's going to be somebody in that bucket because that's where their talent is. Their talent is not in AAA, Double A right now.
Well, I mean, to the degree that Tolley has three major league appearances or
Yeah,
four
but
major
they've
league
seen him.
appearances,
Yeah,
Garcia was there for a week. I mean, those are particularly guys that are have a lot of value and don't have a lot of big league experience.
right. And so that'll be obviously a conversation for many, many, many more days after this. Uh, we will, as this week and this month goes on, be very focused on Alex Bregman and Trevor Story. That is, though, a podcast for another day. That's Sean McAdam. I'm Chris Cotillo. That's the Fenway rundown for today.